Today, let me teach you how not to negotiate a ceasefire. Donald Trump had a much anticipated phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and let me say it, the results were underwhelming. While Trump claims they have made a great progress towards peace in Ukraine, the reality is that there was a lots of talking and a very little action, and Ukraine, it is still very much under the attack. So let's break this down, what happened, what was promised, and what this means for the war going forward. So Trump gets on a call with Putin. The call lasted nearly 2 hours. This all sounds productive, right? Well, not exactly. According to Donald Trump, they discussed lots of things. He says military aid to Ukraine never came up. However, President Putin had a slightly different version. His side claims that he made it very clear that a proper ceasefire is only possible if foreign military aid to Ukraine is stopped. So someone is lying, or at least bending the reality like a yoga instructor. Now, what was actually agreed upon? Well, Russia say that it might pause attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure for next 30 days. This sounds great until you realize that 80% of Ukraine's energy grid is already destroyed. That's like someone saying, I promise not to eat your lunch after they have already gobbled it. And here's the kicker. The pause only applies to power plants, not the rest of Ukraine's infrastructure. So missiles can still rain down on homes, on hospitals, and on military sites. So the question arises, why did Putin agree to anything at all? The answer is simple. He wants to buy some time. Right now, Ukraine is launching drone attacks on Russian oil and gas facilities, which is causing some serious headaches for Moscow. So a temporary break on energy attacks is just as beneficial for Russia as it is for Ukraine. Plus, let's be real, Putin knows that dangling the word ceasefire in front of the West makes him look reasonable. But behind the scenes, he's still making demands, like an end to Western military aid to Ukraine, which in reality would be a dream scenario for President Putin. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky isn't actually throwing a victory party. He's basically saying, we'll believe it when we'll see it. And who can blame him for this? Hours after the call, air raid sirens were blaring in Kiev and Russian missiles were still flying. It's like when your toxic ex says they have changed, but then you catch them texting their side pieces 5 minutes later. So what now? The next round of peace talks is set to take place in Saudi Arabia. The White House is still pushing for a full ceasefire, but given President Putin's conditions, aka no military aid for Ukraine, it's not looking too promising. Meanwhile, Europe is scrambling to figure out its next move because, let's face it, Trump isn't exactly making things easier for anyone. He wants to be seen as a deal maker, but so far the only thing he has managed to negotiate is a temporary break in energy attack that benefits Russia just as much as Ukraine. So at the end of the day, this so-called progress feels more like a diplomatic illusion. Ukraine is still fighting for survival. Russia is still pushing its demands, and Trump is out here acting like he has already won the Nobel Peace Prize. The fact is that we are no closer to peace than we were before the phone call. But at least the two politicians had a nice chat. But before I go, let me also acknowledge the fact that despite the ceasefire's limited scope, US President Donald Trump is the first leader to come close to securing a truce in Ukraine.